So Joyce, just to sort of as people come in, on Tuesday, I lectured your paper, apparently, very badly, but that's okay. And the way that today will work is basically the first half, the first 45 minutes will be me more or less interviewing you, us having a conversation of sorts. Then we'll have a wee break, and then I will sort of switch into a kind of chair role. Although, as everyone knows, Adrian in a chair role means Adrian also can't help but talk a bit. So I will be a a chair who comes in when he feels like he can't help it. But we may as well sort of kick it off. A few people may roll in, but this is nice. So, hi Joyce, how are you?
Hello, hi. Can people hear me? Okay, all that sort of thing. Yeah. Hi, I'm well. Thank you, Adrian. How about yourself?
I am okay. I was just telling everyone else I'm in Sweden right now, and I've had such an afternoon of philosophy of cosmology that I'm delighted to talk about
Paleo.
something closer to my home.
I gotcha.
So,
Yeah,
so it's
great.
nice to, oh yeah, so it's probably nice to start out by just like getting some like context. So some broad context, like how did you get into philosophy of paleontology, right? Because it wasn't like your original sort of home, as it were. You kind of came into it. So do you want to give us the like narrative?
Sure, I can do that. Yeah. So, Adrian's right to say that. Sorry, y'all. My voice might take a little bit to wake up. It's morning here. This is like the first thing that I've done today, so I haven't been talking yet. Yes, I'll be a little thready, but yes, I noticed that you are in a different time zone than me. It's coffee time where I am. Anyway, yeah, so my background, I guess I would say, is most strongly in terms of like the subdomains of science, that I do philosophy of science of, is most strongly in philosophy of biology and philosophy of molecular biology. I started working in plant genetics and then gene expression when I was in high school and in college, and I was biochem chem in college. So my move into philosophy of science was from the sciences, and those particular sciences, in fact. And but when I was finishing my dissertation, which was on the sort of philosophy of some pretty complex molecular kinds, a family of like a superfamily actually of nuclear hormone receptors, a kind of sort of transcription factors. I, like, you do, was on the job market, and I applied to a bunch of different faculty jobs, but also to a few postdocs. And I end up getting the chance to do a postdoc on the conceptual foundations of science, but at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. So that was just too cool of a thing to say no to, to get to go be behind the scenes at one of the best museums of natural history in the United States for a little more than a year, just learning about a whole new science. My philosophy really is driven by my knowledge of the scientific practice, my familiarity with it, my being embedded, with it, immersed in it. So, that was a chance to open up a whole new area of, philosophy of science specialization for me. And I wanted to do it. And also dinosaurs, big dinosaurs, super fun. So yeah, I went to the Field Museum, and I was embedded there with some of the paleontologists who really do conceptual philosophical work in their domains of paleontology, Scott Lidgard and Olivier Riepel. And they were both so lovely. And, it was just a dream postdoc. You get to just walk around and sit in your office and read and think and talk to people and then produce whatever you want, really. There's like no demands other than that. The Field Museum was divided at the time. The research segment was divided into 4 different areas: anthropology, botany, paleontology, and zoology. So like behind the scenes, the curators who are doing research could, specialize basically in, plants, animals, people, or fossils. And there's like geology too. There were, people who worked on minerals and on gems and on asteroids, actually, also. So I was close to the bird fossil lab, And that's basically just like being physically nearby some of those people and getting to become, buds and going to their, data clubs and practice job talks and things like that. I learned about some of their research projects and met some of them. And yeah, I basically was just like around philosophy, around paleontologists enough during my postdoc to start to get into philosophy of paleontology. And yeah, the people who sort of made philosophy of paleontology their main bag, like Adrian, but also like Derek Turner and Leonard Finkelman, they were just too nice, to let me like slip away after my postdoc from philosophy of paleontology. And when they were starting Extinct, they got me on board. And yeah, there's just some communities that are worth being a part of because of how great they are, where, even if you leave the museum. And so philosophy of paleontology is one of those for me. I love working with the people in it, and I love their exciting ideas and the fun topics. And so I, try to stay involved, even though it's true that, philosophy of molecular bio is probably my bread and butter. Okay, how was that, Adrian?
Yeah, that was beautiful. It's worth plugging. I think Joyce's paper in the BJPS, Messy Chemical Kinds, is an incredible paper if you're interested in the relationship between sort of biological kinds and chemical kinds. If you're interested in that sort of biomolecular kind of realm, that paper, I learned a lot from it anyway. So let's talk about the paper itself, right? So just as a startup, like, let's keep going with the narrative thing. So like, how did this story come to be? Like, this paper come to be? What was the context?
Yeah, so I mean, the answer to that really is about immersion and, being a member of a community. So like I said, I was nearby. My office on the third floor of the museum was near the bird sort of prep fossil lab, and that just meant I was around that group enough. And if you read other people's work, if you're generous in that way with your time and constructive with your critique, you show up to their discussions and you help. I think, let's see, what's the right way to tell this story? This is being recorded, right?
Yeah, you can. It will. There is an opportunity to get parts removed. So if you want something off the
Yeah,
record, it could get
yeah.
edited out.
No, I want you all to have, the good, the true, the fun conversations, the real talk. But I should be somewhat circumspect. Let's see. So not every practicing scientist, when you show up as a philosopher to their place of work, thinks that you, philosopher, will have something to contribute. This is just facts. Okay. Some scientists are like, yes, philosophy, that's great, it's so exciting, let's put this in my in my practice. But others are like, expect you to be useless, like genuinely, or hostile. I mean, I have walked into a prep lab before and had somebody, recognize me as the philosopher, know the history of like STS style ethnography, and say, so what is this, huh? Do you think we're witch doctors? I mean, I have literally had someone say that to me before, right? Yeah, so there are people at the museum who were on board with somebody like me being there and having something to contribute, and there were other people who had to be convinced, and were more or less open about their beliefs of that sort. But you can change these people's minds by showing up, by reading their papers, by being generous, by being constructive. And I think, for me, there are some places at the lab that are a story of that. At the museum, they're a story of that kind of success. And this paper grew out of one of those interactions. Basically, I just tried to be a good community member, and there were enough conversations, I think, me participating in sort of these paleontological reading groups, where I didn't like totally waste everyone's time or say like ridiculous, unhelpful things as a philosopher, such that like people started to think like, oh gosh, maybe Joyce can help us with things. Maybe she actually has useful tools. And eventually I think it gave especially good comments on one person's practice job talk. And yeah, afterwards that person asked me for a coffee at the museum one morning, and basically said, hey, there's this thing going on in our field, it's actually really nasty behind the scenes. It's bad for everyone. It's like, here are some of the milestones in the dispute. Here are some of the behind the scenes behaviors that are so awful. It doesn't seem like we in, paleoornithology are making progress on this in the way that we need to, and it's gotten so toxic. Maybe an outsider coming in and working on this issue, somebody who doesn't have a stake in either side, could actually make some progress in this, dispute, could help move us forward, move us past the acrimony. And I was like, well, that sounds really neat. And tell me more about this. And then for a couple of years, Adam and I, met. And whenever we could, I left the museum shortly after he invited me to take a look at this dispute and to see if there was anything philosophically, any philosophical resources that I could bring to bear to the acrimony. But yeah, we met whenever we can, whenever we could, at meetings and things like that. And I basically, started by asking him for a chronology of the major sort of, paleontological developments. And then I just started thinking about, looking at the evidence myself and thinking about different bits of philosophy of science that could maybe help. And I had various ideas and I pursued a few of them. And in the end, I thought this might be a place for some Lakatosh. And so in the end, Adam and I worked sort of together, putting together the paper, and that's the story of how it came about. I basically, didn't say complete nonsense around this person while I was at the field, and eventually he brought me a problem from his discipline, asking me to help solve it, and then I got to do that, and it's super fun. It's one of my favorite ways to find projects, to have them brought to me by the practitioners. It's really great.
Excellent. Like, hopefully we'll have time to sort of circle back to that sort of topic towards the end.
Sure.
So one of the things that I find, and you're very welcome to disagree with my impression of this paper, but one of the things that I find really exciting and interesting about this paper is the way in which it's really, to my eyes, written for scientists. There are ways in which the kind of argument is presented and the way that it goes that isn't the way you would, to my mind, you would present to philosophers. Like, for instance, a lot of the argumentative weight is carried by the diagrams, right? A lot of it's kind of, and philosophers tend to not care about diagrams, and scientists don't care about text. They just go and look at the diagrams. And so I think as a piece of sort of academic communication, something I find, and partly this is because I'm terrible at this, like I can only talk to philosophers most of the time, right? And so something I was really impressed by was the way that this managed to, into my eyes, help me see how one might, for instance, like use philosophical tools in a way that a scientist might recognize or at least sort of pay attention to. And so I'd love to sort of get a sense of, like, first off, am I right that that was the sort of strategy here? And second, how did you go about doing that? And I suppose third, what was the reception, right? If I'm right about what your goal was, have you had much of sort of an idea of whether anyone's paid attention?
Yeah, so I think you are right about that. Adrian, part of the use of figures and the diagrams here to communicate the ideas, one of the reasons it's like that is just because, like, I do figure things out that way. Like, it's how I think, and maybe that comes from my background in science, maybe not, I don't know. But for me, that part of this paper was really a joy because I actually got to use and depict, and display that sort of thing in the product. Whereas for philosophers, I'm always having to, like, sort of like winnow that out of my presentation of my ideas, or I'll include the diagrams. But I mean, I literally just like turned in proofs for another paper yesterday that the editor of the special issue it's like about the whole paper, like, the ideas are great, but yeah, that figure doesn't mean anything to me. I just like it doesn't do anything for me. It's just like so common for that to be the reaction amongst philosophers to the visual depictions of the ideas. But like for me, and I think for a lot of practitioners, scientific practitioners especially, it's they do represent, it's like a way of modeling and communicating the models that we have in our heads. And so I loved getting to do that for this paper, for this audience, to be working with an audience that will get that. And I love the way the pictures, I think they do communicate like more understanding than you get just from the text. And that if you pay attention to them and look at them and then like relay like bits of the text to them, you start to see things that I didn't like actually make explicit in words, but that come out if you pay attention to the pictures. Yeah, so that was fun for me. Okay, so there were three parts of this question. Were you right about that? How did I do that and what was the reception? Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Yeah. So why did I do that? Because I like it and it's how I understand things. And this is an audience who also often understands things that way. So that was great. How did I do it? I mean, if you again, this is like hard for me to make explicit because it's just the way that I think about things. So, but if you mean like practically, you know, the diagrams came out of Adam sending me just a mass of literature, like here's all the important stuff in, the whether birds are dinosaurs and not paleontology from the last 150 years. And and then, also giving me a sort of timeline of the most important developments ordered with the publications in which they happen. And then me, just having to go through all that literature myself and learn it, not having a background in paleontology. I basically made flashcards like an Uber dork, and I like tried to, arrange them in different ways and use images to remember. Like that's where the sketches start to come from, because with so many papers and so much text, for me, having like an image will really help me remember what the significant ones are. So yeah, I basically just, my like the real genesis of these diagrams is in my trying to understand and make sense of all the text that I was trying to like the scientific publications that I was trying to work through. And then I do think that the Lakatosh idea is very visual to start with, like that the core and the belt. I mean, there are already visual metaphors there, right? And so once I settled on the Lakatoshian framework as the right one to use for the analysis of the dispute, I just started thinking, like taking the flashcards with the different pictures, representing the developments presented in like one publication or another, and then ordering them, but separating them into the sort of Adam and the band camps, and then, trying to pick out the relevant ones and then nesting them. So stacking the flashcards that are like the same evidential line trajectory. And then, it was just about thinking about how to take that physical structure, organizational structure that I had used to make sense of the ideas and then depict them in with images, which I just did in PowerPoint, which is ridiculous. If I knew anything about coding, I could have like made a program that did all this for me and would have been like so smart, but I don't know how to do that stuff. So
Yeah, I mean, all of my figures are always just done in PowerPoint. But I was doing nothing.
thank you for making me feel less bad about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of reception, I know that my co-author Adam thinks that the citation count for this paper is lower like than he thought it was going to be, like in his field, but for and I couldn't say like why that is or if that's the sort of thing that like will matter or change or not. We would have to ask him. But for me in philosophy, it's been really gratifying. People tell me they love this paper a lot and teach it and stuff, which is super nice. So, and then also in between those things, I have also been contacted out of the blue by scientists from other areas who see this paper and then ask me as a result to come deal with a problem that they're having in their field and to maybe use this framework to depict a solution to it. So that to me seems great. Like I couldn't dream of any better success, than that, basically, to have this paper having, come out in Cis Bio and have that met, like people who work on angiosperms or on spiders, see this paper and think like, oh, this is a productive solution, way of solving, a sort of dispute that's like gone sour in our area. And could you do it? Could you do this? Like, could you fix it for us too? So that's been great.
That's super awesome to hear. Like, I guess so. So one of the things I mean, many things I find interesting about this paper. So one thing I find interesting about it is, I think probably like most philosophers of science, I have a very sort of Lakatosh, okay, I guess he's kind of got some bits of Popper and bits of Kern. It's all very 20th century, and you think of it in this very kind of static, kind of dead sort of way. And one thing that's so like kind of the sort of magic trick that happens in this paper, where suddenly it somehow is this kind of dynamic tool that's being used to really say something in some sense fairly substantive. And one thing that I think is really interesting about the substantive stuff, which of course was in all of that old stuff originally, is the sort of critical role of sort of history and kind of where it's going. So it's really interesting to have just like, it would never occur to me to say to a scientist, if a scientist is like, you know, what kind of research program should I be flourishing, for you to go, okay, you need to construct a certain type of history. You need to tell me a certain type of a set of narratives. And these narratives, I'm going to show you, some of them are good narratives and some of them are bad narratives. And by engaging in this kind of history of your own discipline, you're going to be able to make some progress in thinking about sort of what productive ways forward might be. Because I take it that, of course, you know, the lesson here isn't necessarily stop saying that birds aren't dinosaurs. Is that if you do want to say that, you've got to show this sort of, you've got to, you know, have these sorts of things happen, right? So it's a really interesting kind of move to sort of say, look, you need to kind of really attend to history. I don't really have a question about this other than, like, I'd like to invite you to sort of reflect on this kind of, the way in which this this kind of approach really makes science's history matter critically for how scientists should think about their way forwards, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I love that sort of description about what's going on here. That was really delightful. Thank you, Adrian, for that way of like appreciating or seeing the paper. Yeah, so one of the things that is really interesting about this project is that I think that one of the reasons the dispute was going on and that I got invited by Adam and then other people to sort of weigh in as a philosopher, as an outsider, is because that there was like a growing feeling in the domain that practice wasn't working the way it is supposed to. And that some of the normal, maybe we would call them internal, if we were going to be bad, again, 20th century philosophers, positivist philosophers, typical mechanisms for, you know, moving a field along were malfunctioning for like power and other sorts of reasons. But, you know, the rules for like what is in bounds in a scientific publication and what's out of bounds, like what kinds of reasons you can appeal to, what sort of behavior you can disclose, what sort of things you can acknowledge or critique, they're pretty tight, right? They're quite strict. And so if you have a domain, you know, sort of malfunctioning in this way, but the reasons for that are out of bounds reasons, practitioners will have a hard time articulating that in the record. And so, you know, I think that one major reason I was asked to come in here is to develop a way of moving things forward that did not refer to the out of bounds reasons, but was still nonetheless like a different reason than usual, because all of the empirical and the like inbounds tools that the practitioners were familiar with had already been tried and failed.
Yeah.
And so there was a willingness to try something kind of new and different, this historical meta-narrative approach that maybe wouldn't have, like, there maybe wouldn't have been receptivity or openness to that had not the, you know, the normal avenues already been tried, the, you know, external sort of problems being, you know, flourishing in the background, and like, you know, a new approach needed. Yeah, I hope this is making sense.
Yeah, no, this is
Cool.
great. Like, I mean,
Cool.
one way of putting your point, I take it, is of course extracting from the particular circumstances of, you know, this debate. There's so much going on beneath the surface of scientific publications that are often critical to know for you to actually make sense of some of the things that are going on in those scientific publications, right? And it's kind of one thing that's interesting is that what this paper, as you say, doesn't do is it doesn't kind of fill out the context in that kind of way. What it rather does is find a sort of independent kind of or pseudo-independent way of giving an argument to sort of help us sort of pull apart the sort of two views and why we might prefer one over the other. And I think that's really sort of you know, that's sort of powerful, right? It's a really nice articulation of what maybe one of the things these philosophical tools can do. But I thought it might be fun to like.
Can I
Oh yeah,
really
come
quick, just make
absolutely.
a
Yeah,
last
of
point about this?
course.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Adrian. So the there are like slight signs on the surface that things are sort of not going as normal. And I refer to that, I think, at the end of the paper, right? So I mentioned that like people have started in this field talking about Schopenhauer, like Hume, in addition to Popper and Kuhn and things like that, right? So you don't see reference to like philosophical figures like that, that like usually I would say until things have sort of degenerated in the field, like a lot of the times, the debates are initially empirical, right? And so when you see a move to the philosophy of science, it often indicates that the normal, channels for resolving a dispute have sort of exhausted themselves, and now people are appealing to these external figures, right, to settle issues. And so yeah, the like that was another thing that made me think, okay, maybe I can bring Lakatosh in here. I'm not the one bringing the philosophy in, right? The scientists have already done that themselves, and they've been grasping around in these, piecemeal or like gestural ways, to like one-offs from Carl Sagan or something like that, to try to like, sort of like slap their opponents on the wrist. You're not scientific enough, that sort of thing. And so once they've like opened the door to that, I felt like, okay, I can actually just like, bang this open and step through here. But that
Yeah.
wouldn't, I'm not sure that would normally be the case. Yeah.
So I totally agree on the sort of point that more or less, I think we said things like this on Tuesday, right? Once scientists start grabbing philosophers, it's a good signal that you're no longer in a productive dispute, right? But one of the other things that leads us to sort of think about is and again, this is one of the things I like about this paper, is like what is philosophy for when you're a scientist? So you might not be shocked to hear that on Tuesday I framed everything in terms of that quote that's attributed to Feynman, right? The ornithology in birds quote, right? And one thing that's really interesting about this paper is that it really is trying to do that. And it leads me to sort of, because I'm, like every philosopher, anytime you come across these weird quotes where scientists sort of say, falsificationism or something, you get really angry about it. But I think that's from the philosophical perspective where we care about a different set of things, right? And I think there's this kind of interesting question about when even in the cases where they're just grabbing them and throwing at each other, what's the function of those philosophical references for the scientists? And I mean, I think I don't entirely know. I know what it signals, but I don't know what they take themselves to be doing. But maybe take that as sort of a comment. Let's move on to sort of something more. So here's something that would probably, I would guess this would surprise Lakatosh, right? So if I got in my time machine, I went back to, before Lakatosh sadly died so young, and sort of said, so Lakatosh, so the placement of birds phylogenetically is part of the core of a research program. I imagine he would be a little bit surprised in the following sense, right? When we think about things that I imagine what he was thinking of about things that would be the core of the research program are things like equations, maybe some stuff about methods, maybe stuff like that. But the placement of a particular taxa in a phylogeny seems like such a kind of unimportant thing. It's a very leading question here, to be, put in to be in the core of a research program. So I wonder if you'd like to sort of speak to, like, there's a kind of objection someone might have to this, which just goes, that's not the core of a research program. That's just where birds go in the tree of life.
Yeah, I love this question. This is really fun. So I'm for sure gonna just admit to the sort of ahistoricist, sort of use of Lakatosh in that sense. This, and we could get into maybe a technical philosophical debate right here about whether like banned as a negation really of a research program. I mean, it even counts as like could be a core as well, right? So like that was like a tricky one, finagling that in the paper, because really like that research program, if we're allowed to call it a research program, setting aside the historical point, it really is dedicated to the position of just no, the other guys are wrong, not, I mean, the whole thing that it's, other basal archosaurs is like, it is part of the idea, but it's very like much just a negation. And so whether that actually could be, like sort of
I mean,
positive core is
yeah.
like
I
a
mean,
thing we could
it's not.
argue about, but
Yeah, I mean, it's not simply a negation, right? There's that wild move where they say, "Oh, all the things with feathers turn out to not be dinosaurs," right?
yeah,
That's a
yeah,
bold claim.
yeah, that's right, that's right. There are different, so these these programs are trajectories, right? They extend through, 150 years of paleontology or more now, really, and yeah, and at different moments, different things are emphasized as the definitional or essential or core things. And so that's another challenge to using something like this. So like if you try to pick out moments like the one you just mentioned, Adrian, and make that the core, you can tell a story where it's less about just the negation. But I think there are other moments in the timeline where that wasn't really what was focused on. And so if you do look at what unifies that camp, like that trajectory throughout, it is kind of just the negation, I think. But okay, so I wanted to mention another difficulty, not just the historicity of the of maybe, making phylogenetic placements the core of a Lakatosian research program, but also like one of the particular, cores I identify it and what's philosophically tricky about that. I wanted to mention that as another thing we could problematize, but I don't actually want to have that debate if that's okay. And the reason is because I think, my position here, like the bigger picture thing, is just that in general, I have found that the typical, maybe again positive or 20th century philosophy of science way of thinking about what's at the heart of scientific practice or scientific research programs or cores is pretty deficient, really. And I mean, like the weird like emphasis on equations is an example. It's like one way we could talk about that. But in general, maybe this is like a paper that I should finally write or something. I remember my dissertation advisor telling me that this needed to be a chapter in my dissertation. I was like 10 years ago now. Wow, but I still haven't written this paper. But so I think that different moments in philosophy of science have tended to make different things the paradigm sort of like starting point or genesis or focus for different for their different pet theories. And so there might be early philosophers of science for whom it's all about equations or other kinds of theoretical presentations. I got raised by the new mechanistic philosophers, and so for them the story is all about phenomena, right? You find a phenomena of interest and then you give a mechanistic count of how that phenomena is regularly produced. But I still think that that's an impoverished view. So in the different like if you're exhaustive about it, if you think you've sort of captured what gets taken as the germ for different research programs, I think that it's an impoverished view. So in my experiences working in all different kinds of science, I think I've learned that there's just all kinds of things that can be at the core of a research program that can end up sustaining a whole trajectory of investigation and sort of like ancestor and descendant relations between the labs and scientists and things like that. And one thing that I have seen is material as something. So like if you just happen to be the curator, like the owner of a certain library of oligos that are really useful in biochem, or a set of fossils that are super useful for phylogenies and phylogenetic disputes. I mean, just the possession of that material and what you could do with it to produce science can become like the engine of a whole, what I think, why can't we call it a research program? Like puzzles or sensational questions can also, I think, like issues that are of sensational interest can become the engine of research programs, of scientific disputes, of cores. I don't know, maybe I'm too permissive in this way of thinking about things, but I do think ideas and theories and equations and phenomena are important originators for, or central foci for research programs. But I don't know. I've also seen some interesting other sorts of things be the germ for
I mean,
long running debates. What do you think?
well, the thing that I found interesting was that I sort of came into the paper being like, this basic idea is like, surely you can't have the placement of birds as a, that's what a silly idea. And then that thought was gone, like by the end of the paper. And sort of the reasons for, and I guess in some sense, I feel a bit silly having thought this in the first place, right? Because I've done a lot of work where I'm talking about the importance of like the comparative method and stuff like this. And actually, like the placement of birds matters critically for this huge number of questions about like how you understand these like important evolutionary transitions in vertebrates. And so, like, the idea that it wouldn't be something that, in fact, really structures a research program is kind of critical. But something that I imagine he might come back. So, Joe and I had a back and forth on Tuesday about, like, there's a way of thinking about research programs where you kind of reify them a lot. And you think that there's, like, a fact of the matter about what the core is to this research program in this really fundamental way. There's another way of thinking about it, which is more kind of pluralistic, which is like, well, what's going to count as the core, at least to some extent, is going to turn on your sort of explanatory interests in certain ways. So take, for instance, the decision you made to have these as two different cores, right? Even though you felt a bit weird about it, right? I take it you could present it as all that, you know, as basically you've got the birds of dinosaurs core, and then the other one's just acting as a sort of source of possible defeaters or whatever. And then you can just talk about changes to sort of accommodate whatever those objections are. Or you could think of it as, you know, being, so is there a right way of going there? Well, it doesn't seem like there's a right way that's sort of independent of your kind of interests, right? And given that the context you're in is something like, which way do we want to jump, or something like that, which one do we expect to flourish, then it seems as if that way of framing makes a lot of sense. And kind of, so I don't know if you like agree with how interest relative it wants to go, but I suppose I'd be tempted to think of this as much more of a like sort of a tool where it's not entirely, of course, it's answerable to the facts about the scientific history, right? It absolutely is. But what the core is going to count as might be quite sensitive to the kind of question I'm trying to ask. I mean, do you want to go that kind of context sensitive, or would you be more sort of, let's call it realist than I'm being?
Yeah, this is fun. This is an interesting question. I mean, to me, this might just be where I'm gonna betray my philosopher of science, mantle here and show my SDS sides and background. But to me, what really decides this is what's happening in the community. So I don't know whether this makes me more interest relative or realist, because I do think practices are real. But the reason to make BAND its own research core here, like the practical one, is that Fiducia writes a lot of books and he gets grants and he has students and trains people. And so like that is to me, like that's another, and I hope this came out some in my sort of permissive, what can be a core, what can be a research program answer. But so how the communities function, like what is serving as an engine for scientific work, not just like progress in terms of development of ideas or truths or models, but like whether people can, get students, get funding, produce jobs, place their students, place their postdocs, and then people continue working on those problems from that point of view. Like the pragmatics of that, the institutional trajectories, the building of communities, like if you give a birds are not dinosaurs talk, do people come to your session at the SVP, right? So like, and how are the panels divided, and what are treated as the, opposing camps, all those things that are happening in the communities like matter to me for representing the different research cores and programs and trajectories. And so I am looking to the community and the way it is organizing itself, and then reflecting that in the Lakatosh, the use of Lakatosh here and in my own accounts. If I didn't, if the opposition to the birds are dinosaurs movement, was more scattered and, sort of always changing what its opposing, idea was, or, not unified in its own research program way, like with a central figure whose texts are constantly referred to and updated, and then maybe I would treat it in the more, oh, they're just shooting the other side down sort of way. But in the practice, in the communities, I think, there is this actual divide into these sides and these programs. And so, I wanted to reflect that. So part of what's happening when I'm looking at the literature, that Adam gives me on this is, trying to figure out how to create the two different, the cores of the opposition, but how not just to like choose that for myself based on the ideas, but to make the choice reflect what's there in the papers, but also in the communities. And after Ostrom's discoveries, there's like a massive rallying around that. And then there's like rallying around Fiducia and Fiducia's opposition. And there is sort of like a third kind of group here. And that's the group that continually says the question isn't settled. They're not on Fiducia's side, but they push back against those on Ostrom's side who are continually trying to excise Fiducia from the scientific debate. There is like a third group here, but like I haven't put them as a research core because I don't think they're the engine of actual, scientific production here in terms of papers and ideas and hypotheses and speculation and collaboration and progress or not. They are like commentators on the debate who aren't like engaged in doing their own, like research, but they are sort of like policing one side's attempt to call the other side non-scientific.
Yeah,
I don't know. Did that help at
no,
all?
that's a brilliant. That's a brilliant answer. So I had a sort of sub question about how we go about identifying cores, and I was very, very happy with that sort of let's call it a kind of sort of more or less institutional with a smaller case I kind of answer. I wonder if, but we can sort of course, and I imagine you were, I don't know, you're probably expecting to sort of at least briefly touch upon this kind of aspect of it, which is sort of one of the big questions with Lakatosh, which is like, well, if we're going to go proper SDS-y, like an SDS person is going to describe what's going on here in terms of, which you've sort of done, in terms of sort of power relations, in terms of these kind of sociological factors. But I take it that sort of kind of you're saying in the paper, it's like, yeah, like we are making a prediction that this one will flourish better than this one. But there's a sort of sense in which they've got to be flourishing for the right reasons, right? So you could imagine someone going, what's the explanation for birds or dinosaurs becoming like, at least in a lot of senses, a consensus with like a pretty loud holdout. Well, they had lots of power. They were able to sort of monopolize various kinds of resources and blah, blah, blah. It seems like that would be, what a philosopher who's not me might call purely sociological reasons, as opposed to kind of epistemic reasons. Like there's some sense in which there's sort of a vindicatory way in which this is a flourishing research program. And I wonder sort of what you kind of make of that kind of worry, right? So if someone was to come back, and because this happens a lot in not just happens in conspiracy theories all the time, but it also happens in areas of sort of science where you have kind of what looks like a consensus and some folks calling it dogma, is the explanation they'll give, oh, it's only because these people have managed to capture the grants and the discussion and these kinds of things. So I wonder, like, do you think that the method you have might be able to distinguish between the good and the bad case, or do you think that that's kind of the wrong question to ask, or what?
Yeah, so I mean, I was offering this method as maybe hopefully a tool for assessing, whether a theory is, degenerating, right, or a research program is degenerating versus progressive, that I was hoping could be applied, right? They're like lenses at which you could look at something, independent. You could have a successful being funded research program and then like apply these lenses and be like, oh gosh, this is actually not progressive in the way that we need it to be, in the right kind of way. It was an attempt to do something like that. Would I guess that it always works? Definitely not. Nope. I think could be gamed, in plenty of ways. That's likely true. I thought it would help with this one, so, for sure, and I would love for it to help with others. I wouldn't venture to say that, it can't be broken. Does this make me a bad STSer? Probably. I mean,
I think it's going to depend. It's going to depend on your STSer, but certainly there's going to be a bunch of STSers where that's way too normative, way too but not for others.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this question of whether we can, really disentangle or even successfully emphasize, epistemic reasons for progress in a scientific field or theory choice, or advancing the dispute, as opposed to sociological, institutional power-based ones. This question of whether we can do that, it obviously is so fraught. I'm sure that people who think only the epistemic is influencing these things, these moments in science, are clearly incorrect. I also think that, I'm also someone who thinks that thinking that there's an absence of the epistemic, playing a role in deciding these things, right, such that it's only sociological or political or power-based factors are also, I think that that's incorrect as well. For me, the really tough challenge here, right, so like if you're speaking to a community where you think, no, like there is still a lot of epistemic in play, and there might be sociological things happening behind the scenes, but actually people don't want that stuff to have the kind of influence it is, such that you can make an appeal, right? It's maybe a successful appeal to the epistemic reasons, right? That's maybe when a model like this would work, and that's the community that I developed this for. That's the context in which I developed it. Knowing that, I think, we could have some hope. For me, the really tough question, of course, in the science and values literature, in addition to science and technology studies literature, right, there is a challenge to even the coherency of, saying something is epistemic as opposed to sociological. And that, I am, in giving my answer, sort of like this in-between answer, I want to acknowledge both these kinds of factors and say that people who think there's only the one or only the other, right, are obviously both incorrect, and that it's some jumble. I'm still like sort of presuming that I can pick out factors, right, that are epistemic as opposed to sociological. I can separate these things, sociological as opposed to epistemic. And, I think that's, I do think that move is threatenable and threatened by work in the literature. This is a very tough question. It's one that I work on a lot in a lot of my different areas of philosophy of science. This question is in the background, and how to make this work. I tend to use the language of epistemic and versus non-epistemic reasons a lot still, because I work with practitioners a lot. I am often talking to practitioners to whom that distinction is foundational, and who don't, for instance, haven't like imbibed the STS critiques that like make that appeal to fact versus value sort of like totally suspect, right? There are people to whom that distinction makes sense. It has massive traction in their understanding of their own practice in their lives, and so I do tend to still use that distinction as a way of engaging successfully with them, because for them it is a way of marking the right kind of reasons from the wrong ones, and I'm willing to play that game with them. But underneath that, I do feel a deep instability of that move, and And, the thing that's tough is that, like, I am often in both spaces at once. So something I say to practitioners that adopts the epistemic, non-epistemic divide, like a philosopher of science and values or an STS person might see that and, basically think that I'm not worth listening to because I have used that. That's a tough thing. But like the scientists, that I'm talking to will often not listen if I don't sort the reasons in that sort of way, or I won't be able to get the traction that I need in the relevant debate with them. So that's a real challenge, and it's something that I am working on. I'm working on trying to figure out how to navigate those two communities and this disagreement between them. Like the one community thinks that you cannot separate these, you can't even talk about them in a distinct way, and the other one is like, that distinction is absolutely fundamental to their practice.
Yeah, no, that was, I have so much I want to say to that, but I'm going to hold myself back. Before we break, I am going to ask you, like, your answers have been like so rich, but I'm going to force you to answer two things very shallowly and quickly. You can just refuse to answer if you want. So one is, we've brought up this distinction between philosophy of science and STS, and actually, I think a fair number of the people in the audience don't actually know what the distinction is there. And so, do you want to tell me what's the difference for everyone else? What's the difference between philosophy of science and STS? And remember, I said answer quickly, which is really mean.
Yeah, okay. Well, because I've been forced to answer quickly, I'm going to give an institutional answer to this, which is I, have a PhD in philosophy from UC San Diego, where, I worked with philosophers of science like Bill Bechtel, Nancy Cartwright, Craig Callender, and Kristen Wusrich, and but I also have a PhD in science studies from UC San Diego, where I worked with historians like John Marino, Naomi Oreskes, Kathy Geary, Bob Westman, as well as communications scholars and sociologists. My undergrad, when I was doing Biochem Chem at UC San Diego as an undergrad and working at the Salk Institute, when I wanted to form an individual major, I was taking classes, sociology of science classes from Andrew Lakoff, Steve Chapin. Steve Chapin and Jay Audenbaugh are the ones who constructed my individual major in the philosophy of life science that let me get my sort of weird philosophy of applied life sciences degree as an undergrad, with like a whole bunch of biochem chem and a little bit of philosophy before I went into, philosophy of science and science studies as my PhD work. So like, what's the difference? The stuff that we read, and learned, and the puzzles that we worked on in philosophy of science were very different, right? And very theory centric. And about, oh God, this is such a hard question to answer quickly. The questions and the texts were just, and the puzzles, right, were very different than the stuff that we talked about in my science studies classes, which were very practice focused, ethnographic, and
maybe a very quick way of putting it might be something like, and no way of explaining this is good, but very approximately, the way I would say is something like, philosophy of science is using kind of tools developed in philosophy by and large to try and understand scientific practice and the kind of, or scientific stuff, and the kind of justification they want often assumes a certain type of scientific rationality, and small r rationality, right? There's this idea that scientists are successful, and in virtue of being successful, there's something right about what they're doing. Whereas STS people use tools from anthropology and sociology. They don't usually have the same assumption about scientific success somehow tracking good reasoning. They're much more they're much less inclined to agree about scientific rationality or something like that. There's huge numbers of exceptions, but that might be one way of putting it.
Yeah, I think that's fine. It's tough because the anti-realist strain in philosophy of science is also so strong, and realism versus anti-realism has like been such a key question, at least in my education in philosophy of science. And so like obviously those philosophers of science also reject, I would say, that rationality posit. Uh,
We should move on. I hate to cut you off, but we should move
no,
on.
no, no. This is,
Um,
yeah, I don't know that there's a quick, easy way
no.
to
It was
answer
just
this question.
it was
The
pointed
training
out.
is different, the texts are different,
It
and
was pointed out to me
yeah.
that that's an unfamiliar term to lots of people. I
I'm
suspect we've just done an
sorry for using
extremely
that.
between us.
Yeah.
No. Between us, we've now confused people even more, which
Yeah,
I think is
yeah.
good. I think is good. People should be confused about this distinction. Finally, what's the relationship? But this is a small question. What's the relationship between progressive research program and truth? Should I believe that birds are dinosaurs?
Ah, wow.
Just a
Yeah.
small question.
Neither of these are these neither of these are easy questions. Um, I mean, yeah, I guess you know what? Since I'm supposed to be quick, I'm gonna be quick. I'm gonna say yes. You know, to use Adrian's little trick from just now, I don't probably believe in capital T truth. So if that's what you're asking about, I'm not talking about that. But the lower T truth, you know, truth that's good enough, like, yeah, I think so. I'm, you know, not really a proponent of the debates, like whether, you know, what we do with past successes and current state of best science, you know, whether we should think of it as like approximately true or partly true or like true in some other way. I'm sort of not a proponent of any of those sorts of things, but yeah, this is where I come out as like really not STS. I do tend to think this is good science. It's we've got good reason, good enough reason to call it truth for me. It does. I think birds are dinosaurs. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take a 5 minute break. Let's come back
Cool.
at like 3 minutes past the hour. So and I'm sure Joyce needs to rest her brain and get another cup of coffee. And then we'll come
Ooh, I will
back,
do that.
have a general conversation. All right, talk to you all
Okay.
soon. All right, we'll start sort of returning as people manage to do it. It says a lot about how engaging I find talking to Joyce that I've managed to sort of go so over time. As I am going to say today, and I'm only going to say one more time in this whole course, which is making me feel kind of nostalgic. If you wish to sort of, you know, ask Joyce a question, basically you may, as you know, throw something in the chat, which no one has ever done. Raise a hand or turn on your video and start waggling around. Joe, take it away.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Joyce. I found the paper really interesting. I have a sort of set of questions surrounding some, I guess, a core of questions. Here's the core: is when doing this sort of work, I'm curious to what extent it's important that scientists themselves read it and go, oh yeah, that feels right. That feels like something that's going on in the field, or that feels like what I'm doing. And the related question is, I'm curious, you know, in as much as you know, how have scientists responded to this particular work? Because I can imagine the birds are dinosaurs folks saying, yeah, this feels right because it tells us why the birds are not dinosaurs research project is degenerative. So hey, here's another hammer I can use, sort of, I don't know, independent of whether it feels like what's going on in the field. So I guess I'm struggling with a bigger question of like, to what extent does research on science need to accord to the experience of scientists themselves? So I was just wondering if you have any thoughts related to that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, you know, a sort of recognition of what you're talking about in sort of like the faces of the reactions of science to engage with the work is like something of a good data point to like, okay, I'm onto something here. I'm capturing part of the experience. Of course, it's difficult because I think, you know, different communities have different norms. And when I speak, for instance, at scientific meetings, I sometimes get told afterwards by practitioners that I'm like way too brash or critical or aggressive, you know, like they have like much more gentler norms basically for disagreeing at meetings and stuff. In, you know, like a lot of that disagreement, at least like amongst in the communities, the subdomains of science that I, you know, interact with, like they have different norms where of the disagreement being like much more private than that. And so the philosopher's willingness to just be like, wait, you said something in your talk that didn't make any sense is like to them like, oh, you know, so bad. So what I'm trying to say is that people could really dislike this and disagree with it in those scientific communities, but not be telling me, I think, because it's not polite in their disciplines. Does that make sense? So I have to be really careful about taking the positive affirmations and the lack of negative ones as reliable data or that, like, you know, captures the whole picture. So, and how much do I like try for that? Like I said, I think it's a good and important data point, but maybe not an entirely reliable one. What was the last part of your question, Joe? Sorry, there was a final thing I wanted to make sure to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's related to basically, I might worry that some positive affirmation on the view is just a sign that, hey, here's another hammer or another tool I have against the birds or dinosaurs folks. And so basically that puts, I think, a little bit of pressure on this feels like what's going on in the field is correct. So yeah.
Okay, no, I did want to say something about that, which is that I seem to find myself often crafting these middle positions that make no one happy except for me. I'm like okay with this. I appear to just be willing to keep doing this, but I actually, so you know how in this piece I'm like, hey, maybe stop calling fiducia not scientific. That's not helpful and probably not fair. There's a lot, if you look in the literature, the Batum people actually, like, that's what they want to bash the other side with. So there's things about this paper that are probably, I think, like not, you know, liable to make it picked up by the Batum side. To me, it's a good sign though, that I'm not just like serving one side or the other here. You know, of course you want your work to be picked up and used by different practitioners, but actually, like, to me, the integrity of the work is more important. And, you know, the fact that I could sort of like come up with an angle of critique for both sides in this case that could like maybe explain why the dispute hasn't moved productively forward when it could have. And I think part of the reason is the behavior of you know, the other side as well. To me, that, I don't know, that speaks of like a balanced and an independent, you know, assessment of the situation, as opposed to like just working in service of the one side rather than the other. But, you know, maybe that's just self-serving of me to think that. But I wanted to point out that this isn't, I'm not sure that this is like the handy dandy tool for Batum that, you know, that like served their rhetorical interests in the way that they wanted it to. And yeah.
That sounds right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, cool. I'll let Emma come in, but I'll make a joke first. You know, I think I take it the strategy, Joyce, is to spend a bit of time building up this kind of cred as someone who is like a really judiciously careful person, so that in about 10 years you can just start selling yourself to like various scientific debates and just come out and be like, this is the correct view on this debate, and then you could make a killing.
I mean, I'm not sure it's comes with financial compensation, but it definitely comes with research projects. So I mean, I'm already there. You know, the scientists who are coming to me from other areas with puzzle, I just like have to find that time to to look at each of them and then write it up, you know. But like people from other domains have looked at this and then been like, you know, come to me with like, I'm involved in a fight with these people, I think they're bad actors, but like maybe you could assess it, you know, fairly. Which I think is good.
That's pretty good. So Emma, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for the paper and letting us discuss it in such a rich form. This is maybe the other domain that's sort of looming in the background here that Adrian mentioned. My background is in history of science. So as I was reading this, I was sort of, the antenna was going off about how a historian could maybe use this or maybe would become skeptical of certain elements of this. And as part of that, I kept coming back to the charts, which I find really fascinating, but I couldn't help but think of historians seeing that and immediately missing context and worrying about that. But I feel like there's something really interesting and probably very directly testable in this through historical cases. So I wanted to know if you could tell us about some cases that you think would or maybe wouldn't work in this sort of format for the historians in the group to sort of get in on this idea. And then I had one quick question as well, which is how important you think disputes are to this framing. Do you need something that is in a dispute, or could you have something that's sort of standalone and see how it progresses? But this is really interesting, so thanks for bringing it to us.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, I do shudder to think about what a proper historian would think about the array of stuff. Yeah, so and I'm delighted to have you look at it so kindly. Actually, that's really generous of you. Yeah. So, that's a great question. So we're sort of getting back a little bit to the issue of sort of what distinguishes STS and philosophy of science. And I'm sorry for, I think I didn't understand when I was asked that question originally that it was sort of about like what is STS for people who maybe don't know what that is. And Emma, I would guess that you do, since you're a historian of science.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't, but maybe that's how you know something about STS, is that you have no idea what actually. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to say something maybe hopefully more helpful about that distinction between the two fields as a way of getting at like the dispute question that you ended with, if that's okay. So yeah, sorry for using acronyms without explaining them. So I think like maybe a pretty typical answer to the, not just like what does SDS versus philosophy of science mean to me, with my different trajectories and working with different people and on different texts and with different methodologies, would be to like go back to Kuhn basically, and a sort of moment after reading Kuhn where philosophers of science take a big stand against parts of the structure of scientific revolutions, and particularly what is said about moments of theory choice and paradigm shift as being sort of irrational or psychologistic. And then other studies of science in sociology and history interpreting Kuhn a different way, and then that creating a sort of a divide. And for the sociologists and historians who read Kuhn as making theory choice maybe not about the normal rational reasons, that creates this that raises this question of like, okay, so what does determine theory choice? And theory choice is about moments of dispute, right? And so STS, when I use that acronym, it refers to science and technology studies, and I think probably people would historically trace STS back to this moment when people like David Bloor found the strong program, or sociology of scientific knowledge, and then you get something like the Edinburgh School, right? So these are all moments in the sociology of science where people are deciding to take seriously this idea that okay, so like I think in Bloor's terms we might talk about symmetry, the principle of symmetry, like this idea that you would explain scientific successes and like failures the same way, right? So like if you don't think that science is progressing towards truth and that theory choice is rational, then people who pick the losers might have the very same reasons as people who pick the winners, right? Like there might not be epistemic differences between those things. So and then people who are no longer looking to sort of rational or epistemic reasons for explaining theory choice, right? They're going to want to start evaluating scientific choices and publications and production and lab experiences in a sort of anthropological way, right? Like they're going to look at what's happening there without necessarily explaining those courses of action with reasons like in the like sort of dry sense. But rather they're going to look at like social, political, and other factors. And that's where you get like the tradition of laboratory ethnography being born. And, STS is sort of like extended, I think, in that tradition. So one of the ways to look at this paper, right, is as like a real sort of rejection of that way of evaluating scientific disputes, right? So like I am saying with this work, like, hey, like let's resurrect this weird old, somewhat rational way of assessing a scientific dispute, right? I'm sort of in a way disavowing some of the STS, right? My STS heritage in doing this. If it helps, right? I around the same time also published a laboratory ethnography. I did a replication of a classic ethnographic lab study of Latour and Wilgard's laboratory life, right? Where I I applied the SDS sort of lens to a study of the laboratory today as well. So I really do believe in both traditions. I have a foot in each. You know, making that make sense at the points of conflict is really hard. I sort of talked about that already when I talked about my use of epistemic versus non-epistemic with some audiences, but like my awareness of the deep instability between those categories in other places. So yeah, there are historians, right, who taught me in the science and technology studies trajectory, who I think, you know, would probably be dismayed by the sort of my just picking out the ideas, right, the evidence, the fossils from this massive, you know, history of debate over, you know, are the birds dinosaurs or not, you know, question, and then trying to assess the answer to that question in this, you know, sort of like evidential, right, Lakatoshian way. There's a way in which that's a betrayal of my STS education and training there. I guess I'll just have to say that, like, I believe in both approaches. I'm not convinced by the rightness over the wrongness of either. I don't think anybody on either side has yet offered a conclusive refutation on the one over the other. I think they mostly convince each other, right, already in the fields. And so, like, I'm, you know, omnivorously delighting in using methodologies from both sides. And if one day I could, you know, pick one of them or reconcile them or make them make sense, yeah, that would be really like a great, I think, a personally satisfying accomplishment. But yeah, right now I'm just methodologically omnivorous.
Well, I really love that, and I think everyone in this group probably does, because that's something that that constantly.
Cool.
Yeah, no, I think on the contrary, I thought it was really satisfying as sort of a primer for self-reflection about what utility a history of science has for scientists, because as Adrian said, this feels like it is so geared towards being actionable in some sense, or
right,
having value for scientists as they reflect on their own practice. And I can see that the ways in which that's possible is probably the ways in which it strips away the STS. And so it makes me wonder, as a historian of science, what does that work go towards for scientists? If
yeah.
So I thought it was really
that's a great way of putting it. Yeah, thanks, Emma. That's a great way of putting it. I mean, you can tell that the audience is scientists here in the sort of betrayal of some of the STS that they don't take on board. But yeah, I did want to, so you had finished by asking about like the dispute framing. And so I tried to sort of like put the focus on disputes in that historical context of SDS and philosophy of science in a way that would make it make sense. But you also asked in your question about what other, you know, historical episodes this could be applied to. And the truth is that I have not thought about that question, and I don't have an answer to it for you. I really would love to know, like, if you had thought, oh, this might work with this case or this other case, I would love to know that, but that isn't something that I've thought about yet and have an answer to. So, but if you have an answer, I would love to hear.
Yeah, I don't have one off the top of my head. There were a couple that things like the Living Fossils program, which I'm sure through Scott Lidgard you maybe seen a lot, which is not quite such a core in its own sense, but again, this expansive idea of a core maybe allows it. So definitely something I'm going to be thinking about, though.
That's a fun idea. Thanks, Amelia.
Yeah, I'm going to continue my role of passing on to other people with a joke on the way. So people always sort of talk about, you know, HPS and how H and P aren't friends enough, and there's a few sort of desperate voices for IHPS. It seems to me that you're sort of trying to get to an ISPS, and, you know, good luck with that. Let's move on to the big room.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a very interesting paper, and it's actually turned out to be very extremely useful to something that I'm working on with a colleague of mine. We are looking at the sort of a second big debate in cosmology that Adrian was tortured with this afternoon. And so the first one was the so-called big controversy that was pretty much the way that you describe in terms of like the attitude of scientists and so on, very similar to what you're describing in the paper, but then there was a crucial piece of evidence that everybody on all sides would recognize as the crucial piece of evidence that's ignited new debate that normally people don't hear about it because they think that debate ended in 1965 with the discovery of cosmic microwave background, and that the Big Bang won. That actually happened over the 4 decades, and there was a number of alternative views. Now, what's really interesting, so I'm wondering, like, the first question is, do you think that maybe the next stage of the debate about dinosaurs and birds can be ignited by a particular sort of evidence which is going to be discovered in the future? And the second question is whether there is something similar in the debate that you encountered to what was happening in this debate I mentioned in cosmology, where the same people who were at the forefront of developing the sort of prevailing view, the Big Bang, actually so-called hot Big Bang, on the side they were developing alternatives too, but serious alternative models. And it wasn't really just one, person, but several physicists actually, or cosmologists, sort of did that, which kind of tells you something about the health of the debate, I guess. So have you encountered anything of that sort? And maybe that's an indication of the sort of the nature of the debate.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. I think that there have been a few moments in the last 60 years of the birds are dinosaur debate that really have been evidentially important. So a lot of times I think the birds are dinosaurs, people point to the initial stuff by Ostrom as, it is foundational, right? But, retrospectively, you can treat that as more definitive than it really was at the time. And it sounds like maybe you're saying that something like that has happened in the cosmological case as well. It's easy now looking back to sort of be like, that was when we knew, or that really settled things. But, I think that there's at least like 2 pieces of fossil evidence. So like the furcula stuff, like finding like fused and unfused clavicles in dinosaur fossils to like deal with, the sort of like the problem, that Hallman was sort of like faced with, that was making him so sure that birds are not dinosaurs. That's like a really important fossil discovery moment. And then, but like the fossil feathers on dinosaurs is all, there's just no doubt here that the recent, the paleontological, sort of like Microraptor, the fossils coming out of China for the last 10 years, and the development of that line of evidence, like that really was an important, maybe even revolutionary moment in this dispute. There's just no denying that's been an evidentially important a moment in this particular debate. Whether or not I think there are future ones like that coming down the pipeline is like it's a really interesting question. I'm not sure that more are needed. That's part of why I answered Adrian's question, are birds dinosaurs? Should we think that's true? With a yes. The fossil evidence looks, I would say, very strong, insofar as like we believe in our categories, birds and dinosaurs at all, right? Like, I mean, this is why like the lowercase t truth, not capital T truth. It seems to me like we have very good reason now fossil-wise to think that birds are dinosaurs, and with the opening up of some fossil territories in China, and then the massive recent spate of discoveries supporting that position as opposed to the other one, based on the uncovering that's been happening there. It's just really, really strong. I'm not sure what else we would need or be looking for right now. I mean, I guess one remaining area of debate in this field is how flight evolved in birds. That's another sort of debate nested in this dispute. It's a dispute nested in the dispute. And so it could be that fossil discoveries could make progress on that part of the dispute that then advanced the question and made people either more convinced that birds are dinosaurs or less convinced, if we could get good evidence on that question. And this is like whether, like the gliding model, the takeoff model, other models are more right. That's something that I think maybe hasn't been as conclusively settled as the birds being dinosaurs other issue. And so maybe there could be evidential revelations yet to come with respect to that part of the question. Did that make sense as an answer?
Yeah, sure. That's very. So just the second part, maybe very quickly. Were there any scientists who actually changed themes or worked on like both accounts, or I mean, is that sort of
yeah, I do think that that some of the proponents who in the early 2000s wrote in to say that dismissals of Fiducia's position were too hasty, I would guess that they have changed their minds now with the fossil feather discoveries. Yeah, so I think that there was a group. So earlier I was talking about that third group that was sort of like not necessarily in the birds are dinosaurs or the birds are not dinosaurs camp, but they were against the birds are dinosaurs people sort of excising Fiducia and the birds are not dinosaurs camp as, not scientific and no longer a good research program. There was a group of people who were like, no, you should not cut off debate. And I would guess that at least some of them now do think that the weight of evidence is such that the birds are dinosaurs position is well established enough to move on. It would be really interesting to ask those people whether, they meant for their position to be sort of like, oh, you should never call for an end to debate, or if what they really meant was, no, there isn't enough evidence yet to call for an end to this debate now. Because if they today now think, no, there really is enough evidence, we should end this debate, then that shows that their position was not like a principled one to the closing of debate, right? Earlier it was a no, the evidential weight is not yet correct.
I'm going to
that would be like an interesting
I'm going to come in here. Francisca's just lowered her hand and I'm not going to let her unless she really doesn't want to. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a question. It's more of a comment on the other examples that might be interesting case, but something that I had to think of while reading your paper, that probably because that's something that I'm looking into is kind of this debates about RNA gene first and metabolism first in origins of life research, and like kind of competing hypotheses there, where I mean, which you could in some case like think about as like cores, although there the situation is probably a bit different in that like the last 5-10 years people have come to think that maybe they're not actually that competing like the birds are dinosaur hypothesis seem to be. But I think this is something that's very interesting to look at from this more historical perspective, how that developed over time, like you also take in the paper, because it kind of shows how exactly people actually like defend their research program and kind of the mechanisms that were important there. And there are a lot of like intermingled debates there also about whether certain experimental strategies are like helpful at all or not, that are kind of come together there. And yeah, so this is not a question, I just thought of that. I thought that was another interesting case in thinking about competing or different research programs.
Yeah, that's a super fun comment, Francisca. Thanks for that. Yeah, fun fact about being an undergrad at UCSD. I did once help Stanley Miller in an experimental demonstration of his abiogenesis experiment. I got to do that one day as a lab hand. But yeah, to me, like the immediate question about applying this framework to that debate is just like, is there an engine for new empirical discovery, right, of results that could make you expect that this Lakatoshian framework could even be, applied in the first place, like as a standard that any of the theories in the relevant field could meet. So like one thing about paleontology is it does have fossil evidence, right? It can go to places and dig stuff up and then have new bits of tools and so like to play with. And so, my question about this is like, so I know the Miller-Urey experiments, I'm aware that there are like some results produced, that can help with this debate, but I'm wondering, how often new material or new results like that get produced, right? Or if a lot of the dispute in this area is more theoretical. If it's more theoretical, this might be, a tough model to like, it just might not, come in fitting how theory choice and progress is going to work in that particular area. If there are empirical, results, if there are sort of like modes for producing evidence in that area, then maybe it would suit, and that would be fun. Yeah, I don't know that area enough.
Sure. I would
know.
definitely say there are theoretical debates, but there's lots of experimental evidence that's been created, like in the last
okay.
50 years. So, you could possibly.
Great. So maybe it would work then. Yeah, cool.
All right, so we should wrap things up. There are two things I want to do before we thank Joyce. The first is I cannot help but say one thing that has just occurred to me, which is really cool that I haven't thought about in regards to this Lakatos machinery, is how clear it makes the point that scientific discoveries cannot be counted as such until there's a history like behind them. And it just makes that so clear, which I think is a really fascinating aspect of this. It means that you just can't say, only in retrospect can you say that blah, blah discovered blah. And I think that's really valuable. The other thing is next week will be our last week, and we're going to be going to some extremely wild handbrake turn, which has been the whole nature of this process. So we'll be talking about collaborative archaeology with Alison Wiley, which I'm sure a significant proportion of you have been very looking forward to. I've been looking forward to this conversation a lot, and you did not disappoint, Joyce. Thank you so much for taking time with us. It's been just absolutely wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Super fun. Great fun to talk about ideas with y'all.
Yeah. All right. See you all next week.